our conference, Disruptions, Reconstructions, and African Directions for Restoration. So we'll start now with our libation.
As permission from the elder to continue. Thank you, sir. So I move this since we're in Palmetto State. It's around time of European holiday season. I guess that's why we got this plant right here. I know we're in the American South right now, but this plant right here, the first time we pour libation into a plant I recognize from Sunday school. Get down. My grandmother would know this plant right here, so let us indeed start with that, brother. You said I shake that right there. In fact, we might open up with all the black women ever been. I shake. Yes, because they know this plant well. So, with that in mind, we would just observe what Papa Jacob's brothers, Papa Jetty Shimshu duty would say is a brief, profound moment of silence. Pour our first libation to that creative force that animated all of us. That force that is the force we cannot see, but we know exists because we exist. As we know, our ancient Egyptian, our Kemetic ancestors would say it is our moon, although it was the source of our life, power, and health. We go into how the animating force has chosen to express itself throughout the timeless time and the endless space that we can neither conceive of or begin to name, but we know that we exist in it, and in our limited understanding, we continue to build our awareness of the fact that while we don't exist outside of it, we continue to expand and move through time in it. According to the expression of that energy that found itself on this small spinning ball of stardust that somehow came into time and space out of that energy, we pour into the people who began to emerge out of that spinning ball and separate themselves in visible form. Those who were the living creatures who came out of that dust, out of that ball, the expression of the divine that we call humanity. Our ancestors who were the first of that expression of divine called humanity, the Africans who came out of Africa and populated the entire world. Their children are ancestors who stayed on the continent of Africa and having populated the world. Those who remain, being the oldest humans on the planet, began to express themselves and then record their expressions and pass them on from generation to generation to generation. Mothers and fathers of everything you will ever think of in this society. Everything, reading and writing and mathematics and architecture and the ways to cook and prepare meals and the ways to educate each other through time and space. Our children, our ancestors who, having combined themselves and passed on that information, then began to move it from mouth to ear to hand to page. Those who invented writing systems around the whole continent of Africa, particularly in the Nile Valley, we put up our ancestors that we call those in Kemet and Kush and Monomotapa, around the Senegambia region, those in southern Africa, those in the central of Africa, the Congo region, those in the Sahel, those who found themselves in the Maghreb near the Mediterranean, those on the east coast of Africa who began to inscribe and pass on their knowledge. Poured into their children, our ancestors who having established themselves millennia before and having migrated through all the regions of Africa, found themselves confronted with their children who no longer recognized them, the descendants of their family who had walked out and adapted to the other parts of the world. Our ancestors who had been set upon by their children who no longer recognized them were then forced into the Western Hemisphere to re-engage with the other Africans who had walked out and become what we now call the Aborigines or First Nations of the Western Hemisphere. To our ancestors who then, having been confronted with this poison being spread by their children who no longer recognized them, who commingled with the First Nations, began to resist their children who no longer recognized them. For the names we know and the names we don't know, the names who resisted in the Western Hemisphere, Ganga, Zumba, and Palmares. We pour to Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and Henri Christophe in Haiti. We pour to the Maroons of Suriname. We pour to the Africans who resisted in Central America, Zumbi. We pour to the Africans like Yanga in Mexico. We pour to the Africans who resisted in Spanish Caribbean, in the Dutch Caribbean, and all the Africans who resisted all throughout the hemisphere. For the direct bloodline ancestors of those who persisted in the places that are familiar more to the people who ended up in this part of the world. We reported those Africans who were abducted by the Spanish, who commingled with the First Nations, and who resisted so well that the Spanish said we will not enslave Africans in North America. We'll just go back to the Caribbean. I said, a century later, to those 20 and odd Negroes who now, that the people have seen fit to try to recognize from 1619 were part of a sea jacket between the English, the Portuguese, and the Spanish, who found themselves in Port Comfort, Virginia. I said, our ancestors who resisted their way out of enslavement in Virginia, who resisted their way out of the experiment that John Locke put together called Carolina, seemed to split it in North and South Carolina. We owe it to our ancestors who resisted in the places like Maryland and New York and in Maine and in Rhode Island and outlying plantations. I said, every ancestor who resisted, either in her hand or in her heart, to the Igbo woman who poisoned James Madison's grandfather in Fort Wayne, Virginia. I shake. Denmark, Vesey, and Gabriel Prosser. I shake. Sacramento, named for her Khan ancestors, who we call Harriet Ross Tubman, who not only resisted but went back and liberated many Africans. I shake. The ancestors of every African who wanted to resist in their feet but had to do it in their heart, who prayed for this generation to come and be those who are now convened here in South Carolina to not only remember them but take the next fight forward. I shake. Back now we pour to our direct bloodline ancestors. We pour to the women and men who gave birth to the women and men who gave birth to the women and men who gave birth to every African in this sacred space that we are calling in. And so we ask now that everyone in their mind and their heart or out of their mouth name the bloodline ancestors who made it possible for all of us to be here today. Restoring order in my eye in the world. I say.
One of the brightest stars in the field of history. Dr. Bobby Donaldson, a native of Augusta, Georgia, who has been such a bright light in reconstructing history in South Carolina. He is on the faculty of South Carolina State and has lent his talents to multiple organizations throughout with his phenomenal research. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to some and present to others Dr. Bobby Donaldson.
Brother Dr. Gallman, thank you for the introduction. I wish I were on the faculty of South Carolina State. I teach down the road at the University of South Carolina, but don't tell them that. I'm honored to be here this morning and to be among this august audience. Brother Dr. Greg Carr, I'm finally glad to see him. Years ago, my mentor, distinguished and pioneering sociologist Andrew Billingsley, said, I've got to meet Greg Carr. Yeah. So today is the day, Professor. I'm glad to be in your company. Also, Dr. Gallman is a good friend and mentor, fellow historian, and I tried desperately to dodge his invitation. I had another engagement, and he said, make it possible for me to be here this morning. And how appropriate it is that we gather in this historic building on the campus of Clafin University, a building built in 1913 on a campus founded over 150 years ago in the period of Reconstruction in 1869. Now, what I'd like to do this morning is go deep into my archives and pull out an unfinished paper that I struggled to work with 15 years ago. And then Dr. Gallman's invitation has now permitted me the opportunity to revisit this paper. So I invite your engagement and your critique thereafter. What I'd like to focus on is this topic: race history, African-American pioneers, and Reconstruction historiography. Now, ironically, based on my research, during the first ASCAC meeting at Los Angeles Southwest College in 1984, the topic and the title of that meeting was this, quote, "Rescuing and Reconstructing Black History and Humanity."
Right.
So what I'd like to talk about this morning are those pioneering scholars and activists and historians who are working to rescue and reconstruct the history of Reconstruction. You'll bear with me, this laptop gets stuck, so I'll be walking over to hit the button. I'd like to begin, if it's stuck, I'll call it, with a quote from a South Carolinian, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. And in the 1930s, Dr. Bethune was actually the president of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, established by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. And during an occasion in Washington at one of their meetings, Dr. Bethune gave a lengthy interpretation of African American history beginning in the Nile River Valley. And in this message, she talked about the important role of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History as an intervention into the curriculum being taught in American schools. And she argued for the need to create new lesson plans, identify new sources that she argued is our obligation and our sacred duty to teach them their history. Now, one of the persons who agreed with her was this man, Dr. J.W.E. Bowen. Dr. Bowen was a professor at Gammon Theological Seminary, a very accomplished AME, later United Methodist minister. But in 1895, Dr. Bowen pulled together an assembly in Atlanta, weeks after Booker T. Washington delivers his famous Atlanta Compromise Address. And the occasion of this gathering was called Africa and the American Negro, a Congress on Africa. And in this discussion, he talked about the importance of a new history. These are his words. History is history, and fact is fact. What has been written is written and cannot be unwritten. This is 1895. We are afflicted in this day with a brood of ready, flippant, inaccurate writers, white and black, who are disposed to misrepresent the past and understate the present at these times appertain to the Negro. To tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth is at times unpopular and distasteful. Now, this is not 2019. Let me repeat that. To tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth is at times unpopular and distasteful, and the fool or venturesome youth who is thus audacious in public speech will find that prudence and sophistry are no means virtues and accomplishments. Then he concludes, the American Negro is the American Sphinx.
Come on, buddy.
His history has not been fully deciphered.
That's right.
Pioneering scholar Dr. J.W.E. Bowen, 1895. It was published in 96. 40 years later, a young burgeoning scholar writes the following in the Journal of Negro Education. He says, quote, "It is unfortunately true that the writing of American history has been quite generally notorious for its lack of objectivity, its propaganda, and its passionate partisanship. Then he says, no era in American history has been so greatly abused in this respect as that of the Civil War and Reconstruction. The historians of this crucial period in the development of the American society have remained slavishly devoted to partisan viewpoints. They have pleaded sectional causes. They have created and maintained racial stereotypes. So what is wrong with the history of Reconstruction in 1935? They have misrepresented and misinterpreted facts in order to sustain traditional social patterns. White supremacy, the Negro, unwilling pawn among the social movements and forces of this period, have been employed as the black dupe by the vast majority of American historians.
Come on, brother.
The black man has been maligned and ridiculed for his role in that titanic struggle, and the racial stereotypes invented by axe-grinding historians to fortify their Civil War and Reconstruction, these largely remain controlling in the mental images of the Negro held by the vast majority of the dominant population of the country.
Yes, sir.
The title of that speech was Reconstruction Reinterpreted.
Yes.
Published in October of 1935 in the Journal of Negro Education. Published on the campus of Howard University.
That's right.
Now what's striking is that the author of this quote is not Dr. W.B. Du Bois.
No, sir.
It is not Carter G. Woodson. Anyone have any idea who this might be in 1935? First African American to receive a Nobel Peace Prize.
Ralph Bunche.
Ralph Bunche. Ralph Bunche said that Ralph Bunche said that in 1935. So what I'd like to dwell on this morning are those scholars, largely unknown, who set the stage for the Ralph Bunche, Carter G. Woodsons, and Dr. W.B. Du Bois. Notice the year that Bunche says this, 1935. Black Reconstruction, the mammoth book by Du Bois that was largely ignored and dismissed, is now emerging. I'd like to go back to the year of 1885 in my hometown of Augusta, Georgia. It was a meeting of a group called the Sumner Literary and Historical Society in 1885, and their mission was to document Negro history. The founder of the group was this man, the Reverend William Jefferson White. Now I know Brother Galvin went to this school in Atlanta called Morehouse. This gentleman on the screen is the founder of Morehouse College in Augusta in 1867. He was a former Freedmen's Bureau agent. He was a founder of the Republican Party, and he was a staunch civil rights activist. And in 1885, he delivers an address entitled "The Negro Problem as Agitated in This Country." He says the following: "Of all who came to this newfound world, none but the black man came by compulsion. As the country expanded territorially, labor became more valuable. The accumulation of wealth were greater. The ruling class became less humane, and the cords of slavery were tightened. With the end of the Civil War and emancipation vivid in his mind, Reverend White said in 1885, the war is not ended. The stronghold of caste and prejudice now confront us. This fortress is to be stormed and our walls leveled to earth. I do not know that I can give any better name to this fortress than Negro prejudice. Negro prejudice lifts its head every nook and corner." 3 years later, 3 years later, William Jefferson White extends an invitation to a journalist who wanted to travel from Washington, D.C. to Charleston. The journalist comes to Charleston, and he's there to do research on the failures of Reconstruction. So what transpires in South Carolina, in the American South, between 1877 and 1888? And this journalist comes and he goes to Charleston, and then he goes to Augusta to meet the Sumner Literary Society. And what he does in his research, he takes back to Washington and reports on it. He talks about how he's gravely disturbed by the failures of Reconstruction, the failures of the promises of Reconstruction, the uprooting of black schools, black landowners, black political figures who've all been cast to the margins. But the journalist goes back to Washington and writes this, and I think you may have heard of him before. His name was Frederick Douglass.
Yes, indeed.
And he writes a lengthy critique of Reconstruction and the misinterpretation of Reconstruction. Someone who joins Douglass in this endeavor a few years later is this journalist, Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells, who had published on racial violence and lynching, discrimination, was asked to write a memoir about her time. And before the book is published, Ida B. Wells talked about how this memoir, this autobiography, would be important to reinterpret Reconstruction. She says the following: "It is therefore to the young people who have so little of our racist history recorded that I am for the first time in my life writing about myself. I am all the more constrained to do this because there is such a lack of authentic race history on Reconstruction times written by the Negro himself. But of the time of storm and stress immediately after the Civil War, our race has little of its own that is definite or authentic. The history of the entire period, which reflected the glory of the race, should be known. Though this is the case, most of our history is buried in oblivion, and only the Southern white man's misrepresentations are in public libraries and textbooks of the land. The black men who made the history of that day were too modest to write about it, or did not realize the importance of the written word. And so, because our youth are entitled to the facts of race history, which only the participants can give, I am thus led to set forth the facts contained in this volume." And when you read Ida B. Wells' memoir, it is very much a revisionist account of Reconstruction history. And there are numbers of persons one could cite who join her in this endeavor, who seek to challenge the prevailing interpretation of this extraordinary period in American history. An interpretation that is shaped by the very individuals that Ida B. Wells indicted. And so in this window of time between 1890 and 1935, there are a series of essays, sermons, literary works, and editorials that challenge the prevailing interpretation of Reconstruction. These publications are direct political acts designed to correct and disprove popular and scientific ideas about African American ineptitude, African American political incompetence. So in this window of time, in large halls, and exhibitions and parades, we see Reconstruction being lifted up among African American scholars and activists. Now, what are they responding to? One only has to look at the best-selling movie of the 19-teens, The Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith. Has most seen that? It is set in South Carolina. There is a scene that reinterprets the Reconstruction leaders of this state. And if you are an uninformed individual, the takeaway of that scene is what? Incompetent, immoral, African Americans sitting in the State House of South Carolina with no shoes, ragged clothes, sitting in their chairs with their feet on the tables,
Yes, sir.
eating a chicken wing.
That's right.
1950, the best-selling movie of the time. A movie that was endorsed by one of the leading historians in American history at that time, who just happened to be the President of the United States, Dr. Woodrow Wilson,
Yes, sir.
who in the 1870s during Reconstruction lived 4 blocks from the state capital of South Carolina, in Columbia. And he endorsed the film as being an accurate account of American history. This is what Ida B. Wells and others were referring to. This book, The Negro Beast in the Image of God, a best-selling account that chronicled white supremacy in the late 19th and early 20th century. She was responding to publications like The Leopard Stop and The Klansman, and this work was adopted, was used as the basis for the birth of a nation. This is what they're responding to. Now, not surprisingly, many of the leading defenders of African American life and politics during Reconstruction were actually Reconstruction leaders themselves. And perhaps no witness of the Black Reconstruction era was as conscious or attentive to the value of history and its political consequences as was this man, John Roy Lynch of Mississippi. Lynch was a former congressman during Reconstruction. And in 1913, he published a book entitled, quote, The Facts of Reconstruction. Lynch challenged prevailing scholarship, prevailing popular interpretations, and observed he did not, quote, attempt to conceal, excuse, or justify any act that was questionable or wrong. But in the preface, he notes the following. Very much, of course, has been written and published about Reconstruction, but most of it is superficial and unreliable because nearly all of it has been written in such a style and tone to make the alleged facts harmonize with what people believe to be the blatant sentiment. In writing what is to be found in these pages, the author has made no effort to draw upon the imagination. Let me repeat that. A witness to Reconstruction says the author has made no effort to draw upon the imagination, nor to gratify the wishes of those whose chief ambition is to magnify the faults and deficiencies in some to its white people. Now, after the Texas publication in 1913, the leading historian in terms of popular attention was a man named James Ford Rhodes. He published a number of popular books on American history, including this series, The History of the United States. And so when Representative John Roy Lynch turned the pages of James Ford Rhodes' section on Reconstruction, he was astonished by what was alleged. For in this scholarly publication, James Ford Rhodes interprets Reconstruction precisely like the narrative in Birth of a Nation. Now here is someone like Lynch reading this. And so Lynch writes a damning critique of this book, History of the United States. He tries to publish this book, this critique, Professor Carr, in the American Historical Review. He tries to publish the critique in the American Political Science Review, and they all refuse to publish. So he calls upon a colleague named Carnegie Woodson, who has a relatively new publication called The Journal of Negro History. And it is in that publication that Professor Lynch writes his critique of Rhodes. He says the following: this book is not only inaccurate and unreliable. It is the most biased, partisan, and prejudiced work I've ever read. It is the most biased, partisan, and prejudiced work I've ever read. Now, I underscore this because if not for Woodson and the platform of the Journal of Negro History, I cannot even quote that reference. Lynch acknowledged that there were problems with Reconstruction, but he said, quote, "Fair, just, and impartial historians will someday write a history covering the Reconstruction period in which an accurate account based upon actual facts of what took place at that time will be given, instead of complication and condensation." These guys can write. "Instead of complication and condensation of untrue, unreliable, grossly exaggerated statements taken from political campaigns."
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I suggest it is fair to argue that the impact of John Roy Lynch's findings on the larger field of Reconstruction has been largely overlooked and dismissed,
Yes, sir.
because our attention focuses on that of Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yes, sir.
There's another pioneering historian I want to lift up today for our contemplation. Has anyone ever heard of Dr. James R.L. Diggs? One person. Who was he? In 1909, James R.L. Diggs was a Baptist minister in Lynchburg, Virginia. And he writes a letter to his colleague, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. James Diggs was also a member of the Niagara movement. Later, he becomes the chaplain of an organization called the Universal Negro Improvement Association, established by Marcus Garvey. And he also serves as the president, later, of the Baltimore Division number 72 of the UNIA. But in 1909, Diggs, who just received his PhD in sociology, writes Du Bois and says the following: "The educated Negro owes the world a history of Reconstruction." Let me repeat that. He tells his friend, an educated Negro owes the world a history on Reconstruction. No subject, he tells Du Bois, has been treated in a way more harmful to our race than this subject. We must give our views of that period before the public. The series of works by Southern writers present our white brother's side, but do not find proper credit given to our people for what good was really done during those days. Now, Du Bois follows Diggs' lead. Many of us know his book, The Souls of Black Folk, published in 1903. But many may not know of his important article in 1910, published in the American Historical Review, entitled Reconstruction and Its Benefits. We also may not know a textbook that Du Bois writes in 1924. The title of the textbook, written for children, was entitled The Gift of Black Folk, different than the earlier publication, The Souls of Black Folk. In these works, Du Bois critiques not only the leadership of people like Booker T. Washington, but he also critiques the history that Booker T. Washington and others underscored. In the book, Up From Slavery, Booker T. Washington offers a disproving account of Reconstruction. This is what Booker T. Washington says in a best-selling book. Now, many of us know The Souls of Black Folk, published in 1903. Booker T. Washington's memoir From Slavery was published in 1901. The Souls of Black Folk was not a bestseller at all. Up From Slavery Was, circulated in many different venues. It is a best-selling book. So when you pick up the best-selling book, what do you read about Reconstruction? Quote, in many cases it seemed to me, this is Booker T. Washington right here, that the ignorance of my race was being used as a tool with which to help white men into office. And there was an element in the North which wanted to punish Southern white men by forcing the Negro into positions over Southern whites. In his next book, The Story of the Negro, Booker T. Washington perpetuates the myth of black incompetence and Negro rule, relying only on his memory. Remember someone else said your imagination? Relying on his memory, Washington offered a hopeful outlook on racial relations in the South. Now, who does Washington use as the source of some of his information? He turns to this pioneering work, published by what many argue is one of the first known African-American historians, the Reverend George Washington Williams, who published a book called The History of the Negro Race, 1800 to 1880. Has anyone read this book? Few. Turn to the chapter when you have a moment on Reconstruction. And this is part of what he says about Reconstruction. He says, the government gave the Negro the statute book, which is a mistake. The government gave the Negro the right to vote, that was a mistake, when he ought to have been given the spelling book. The leading historian, George Washington Williams, said, the government placed him in the legislature when he should have been in the schoolhouse. Overall, they were an ignorant majority, without competent leaders, who could not rule an intelligent Caucasian minority. Now, earlier I talked about how Ida Wells critiqued both black and white writers about Reconstruction. One of the persons on her list was this pioneering historian, George Washington Williams. Many, many years later, the great historian John Franklin writes a compelling biography of George Washington Williams. Now, if you think about Booker T. Washington and George Washington Williams being the prevailing interpretation of the period, one of the persons who was deeply disturbed by this, and there are several new books coming out by this pioneering activist and journalist, William Monroe Trotter of Boston. Trotter, who had been at Harvard with Du Bois, writes Du Bois a note about the need to change the narrative on Reconstruction. These are his words. We want to hear you, talking to Du Bois, on the side of Reconstruction that deals with the anti-Reconstruction period and the black codes. So not only talk about the achievements of the period, talk about how it was undermined intentionally by roadblocks and racial violence. Now, Du Bois follows the lead of Monroe Trotter in The Souls of Black Folks and in the book, Black Reconstruction. One of the important chapters in the book, Black Reconstruction, that to the dismay of my students I assign to them, is a chapter entitled The Propaganda of History. And in that chapter, Du Bois offers a critique of the failures of scholars who preceded him. Now, it should not be surprising to those who've read the biographies of Du Bois that Du Bois had a deep, perhaps the word disdain is not the word, but he felt some kind of way about this man,
Yes, sir.
Carr G. Woodson. Just read the correspondence.
That's true.
Here you would have hoped two major minds would have worked together. History does not suggest that was the case at all. Both are Harvard graduates, but that means nothing. The boy said he was first. So, Carr G. Woodson was another interventionist in the history of Black Reconstruction. And Carr G. Woodson's surveys of American life and history, which were adopted in many African-American schools, and colleges, including Clafin. This is what he says in his publications. He says that his works, he observed that the works did not, quote, give the general reader much insight as to what the Negro was, how the Negro developed from period to period, and the reaction of the race on what was going on around him. There is little effort set forth about what the race has thought and felt and done in its contributions. And one of the important contributions of Woodson is not only the number of publications that he published, both as an author and as a publisher, but also in the number of students and colleagues that he mentored. One of the unsung figures shaped by Woodson was this man, Dr. Monroe W. Work of Tuskegee. Originally, he taught at what is now Savannah State College in Savannah. And it was Monroe Work who often supplied a lot of the data that Carr G. Woodson used in his publications. Monroe Work was the editor of the path-breaking publication, The Negro Yearbook, in his position as the director of research at Tuskegee. And it was Monroe Work who thought it was necessary to conduct a systematic investigation not only of the Reconstruction period, but of Reconstruction participants. So in 1920, he and Woodson began in earnest to identify the surviving members of the Reconstruction period, to pull their papers, and to conduct interviews with those individuals. And those papers are now housed in the Carr G. Woodson collection at the Library of Congress. So there are letters from aging Reconstruction leaders from this period, including letters and speeches by this gentleman named Thomas E. Miller, who was a Reconstruction legislator who in 1896 goes next door and becomes the first African-American first president of what later becomes South Carolina State University. But Miller, on a regular basis, sent to Carr G. Woodson a series of observations about the Reconstruction period. So Monroe works closely with Carr G. Woodson. Another pioneering scholar is this scholar, A.A. Taylor.
Yes, sir.
Auruthius Ambush Taylor, a protege of Carr G. Woodson and later chairman of the history department at Fisk University. Now, has anyone here ever heard of A.A. Taylor? You may have heard of one of his prized students. His prized student was this man named John Hope Franklin, who was a student of Taylor at Fisk University. But Taylor published a series of revisionist accounts of Reconstruction, both on Virginia and on South Carolina. Many of them were serialized in the Journal of Negro History. And Taylor sought to publish his work in major presses, and no one would agree to publish his work except Associated Publishers, created by Carr G. Woodson. In his work, Taylor not only highlights the errors of previous treatment of Black participants, but he also signaled the need for greater consideration, not simply on the political aspects of Reconstruction, but on the social and economic aspects of Reconstruction. Taylor's student, Donald Franklin, who I mentioned, wrote reviews of his professor's work. And he said that Taylor's research on Reconstruction, quote, pointed up the benefits of Reconstruction and proved conclusively that some Negroes possess political morality and a keen sense of responsibility in public service. In his works, when you read the footnotes, Taylor not only consults the Reconstruction leaders, he's one of the first to look at the catalogs of historically Black colleges, many of whom were founded during Reconstruction. He reads the minutes of church newspapers, and he makes a dogged effort to save all the Black newspapers that were being published during the Reconstruction period. And those sources are also housed in the Carr G. Woodson collection at the Library of Congress. Another scholar influenced by Carr G. Woodson was this man, Dr. Charles Wesley, who wrote a path-breaking study of Negro labor in the United States. This book marshaled forth considerable sources to challenge the idea of black inferiority. And it highlighted the, quote, physical compulsion and fear that was being used during this period. This is what Wesley says. The unsatisfactory regulation of wages, the consciousness of new liberty, the mutual lack of confidence between the former masters and their former slaves, and the attitude of the Southern labor system to which the Negroes, along with others, were subject, were the predominating influences in determining the Negroes' position toward labor in the early days of Reconstruction. Lazy, shiftless white men were judged as individuals, but lazy, shiftless Negroes were judged as representative of the group. Wesley goes on to argue that the majority of the studies of the Reconstruction period have been content to refer to this circumstance as if it were complete truth. He also takes on another major work of the period by Claude Bowers. Claude Bowers in 1929 published a controversial book entitled The Tragic Era. Now, Du Bois, from about 1909 to late 20s, have been working on this mammoth book, Black Reconstruction. And it is this work that pushes Du Bois to ultimately publish the book the next year, in several years, of Black Reconstruction. Now, a way to gauge the impact of these publications is by gauging the response of African American intellectuals to these publications. So Bowers' book comes out to great acclaim, and many applaud it as a strong and sensible critique of Reconstruction. But black leaders respond and say, not so. And one of those persons who deserves much broader awareness is Dr. Anna Julia Cooper. Cooper was a historian in her own right. And when Bowers' book, The Tragic Era, is published in 1929, she responds. How does she respond? She says the following: it seems to me, now this is someone who lived with Reconstruction, it seems to me that the tragic era should be answered adequately, fully, and finally and again, it seems to me that you are that person. Now who is she writing to? It seems to me that the tragic era should be answered adequately, fully, ably, and finally, saying, get this book done, so that we may have a different account and interpretation of the Reconstruction era. And Du Bois does so. So I mentioned earlier about the 1910 American Historical Review essay that Du Bois published in that year. He also published the book Black Reconstruction. One of those persons who was influenced by the book Black Reconstruction is this young scholar, John Hope Franklin. In 1947, John Hope Franklin decides to begin writing his own account of Reconstruction. And he's very much upset about the publication of a book by a man named E. Merton Coulter. The book is entitled The South During Black Reconstruction. And in the critique of this publication, John Hope Franklin yet again speaks about the failures of Reconstruction. Now what's important here, this is 1947. 1947. Over 10 years earlier, Du Bois' path-breaking, revisionist book, Black Reconstruction, was published, seemingly setting the record straight about Reconstruction. And yet, time and time again, Du Bois' book is literally ignored by prevailing scholars. And so John Hope Franklin, a newly minted PhD from Harvard, says, how can you be a legitimate historian by ignoring some of the major works published in the last decade? And he outlines what those major works are. Young's review of Coleman's work underscores the silences and deliberate efforts to disregard everything I just told you. While there is a great deal to admire in Du Bois's classic work, I argue that when you read The Souls of Black Folk, you are reading the work of Anna Julia Cooper. You are reading the work of Arutheus Ambush Taylor. You're reading the work of John W.E. Bowen. You're reading the work of Ida B. Wells. And so more attention need be given to the historians who enabled Du Bois's work. And while many of them face nearly insurmountable obstacles, they remain, as I hope you understand today, dedicated to their vocation. Their work deserves and commands our renewed attention. Now, Dr. Dalton, that's where my original paper stopped. There is much more I want to add, but I want to pause now, entertain any thoughts, reflections, and questions, and then I want to go back and tell you what I hope to explore in the work ahead. So let me pause here and thank you for your time and attention.
You talk about some of the white scholars like U.B. Phillips and their impact on how we respond.
So part of in the larger work, I spent several pages talking about U.B. Phillips and William Dunning, both products of what's called the Columbia School of History. And their interpretation of Reconstruction is not too far apart from Birth of a Nation. This is what's astounding. Birth of a Nation is fictional. And yet many of the leading scholars are very selectively looking at certain sources, ignoring others, and presenting an interpretation that Reconstruction was an abysmal failure because of the incompetence and the immorality of black leaders and their Yankee supporters. And they cite this. What's astonishing about William Dunning and U.B. Phillips is that they produced, like Carr, a series of scholars who go across several states reproducing the very same critique. And so someone like A.A. Taylor, trained by Carter G. Woodson, writes a history of Reconstruction in South Carolina, responding directly to a student trained by William Dunning. And these books are published within a decade of each other, and they are astoundingly different interpretations of the same time period. So these two persons, Phillips and Dunning, who you mentioned, they set the stage. And that is why these scholars, with no resources, no platforms, limited access to many of the leading schools in the country, slowly but surely chisel away at these arguments.
I just want to mention real quick that there's one of the sons of South Carolina, John G. Jackson, did his pamphlet on black and
It's on the slide. And I want to tell you, where's Mr. Brown? One of my colleagues who was here earlier. Mr. Brown does a lot of research on Robert Brown Elliott. And there was a gentleman whose paper, so I'm also an archivist. And there was a family in Columbia whose name was the Palmers. And two of their ancestors were in the Reconstruction General Assembly in South Carolina. And when I was going through their papers, I found a copy of Jackson's history of black Reconstruction in South Carolina. And Mr. Jackson, who I knew from Chicago, was actually born in 1907 in Aiken, South Carolina. And his relatives are part of that Reconstruction period. Something I did not know until 2 months ago.
But thank you, brother. First of all, I know we paused. We're gonna keep going, so I'm gonna keep this quick. By the way, my copy of Black Reconstruction, the John Jackson's pamphlet, I bought from that brother right there in the back in Columbus, Ohio. When he was set up at the African Center many years ago, in a few places you can get it. But the question really speaks to the underlying, what Jacob Russell called the intellectual warfare we talked about. Just about everybody you mentioned, John Bowen, Arutheus Taylor, all these cats, and then Woodson training them, are trained in by black scholars, who are also building institutions. It's institutional warfare. John Franklin, I think it was Woodson's funeral, where they approached him with the possibility of taking over the association. He decides not to do that. My question really is about Because Franklin, of course, who worships George Washington Williams. And, you know, of course, right, like I said, not a biography and everything. And in 1947, when Alfred Donaldson and recruited Franklin to write what would come from slavery to freedom, part of that's because Woodson and almost every scholar you've named so far is in black institutions. They don't see, of course they would like more resources, but they don't see where they are as limited or as shut out. They're trying to build institutions, not be exceptional Negro thinkers in white spaces. But the reason that they do from slavery to freedom in part is because Woodson and Wesley have the Negro in our history, which is black controlled, black published, segregated schools.
And the trunks going from church to church.
No question. And training Arupius, Taylor, all them cats, you know, Lorenzo Green, all them. My question is this. How much of what you've laid the foundation for, and parenthetically, we'd love to publish that in the conference, brother, but I also understand that where you work in the space, like I say, you would love to be at South Carolina State, this is really the question. How much of this is not only tracing how black scholars, women and men, and at the Cooper point, absolutely understated, very important. How much of this is about institutional warfare? And what you're really also tracing is how white institutions recruit black scholars. They don't mind being critiqued once they can accept it, but the thing that we've lost, how much this is about the loss of black institutional platforms out of which to build our own narratives, forget what they talk about.
It's precisely that.
Please help us.
And that's why I wanted to begin with this obscure person the most, William Jefferson White. So I talked about his own essay in 1885. But I underscored the fact that it was an essay presented at a group called the Sumner Literary Society. Yes, sir. A society founded during the heyday of Reconstruction. What Professor Carr has mentioned, this should not be underappreciated. Reconstruction was the reconstruction not only of a history, but of communities and institutions. And they understood that the only way this history would have legs and be an enduring legacy if there were platforms. And so they create organizations, they create black newspapers, they create black publishing firms to get this out because there was no access. And so part of what I wanted to underscore when I talk about John Franklin, who becomes in many ways the first endorsed Negro historian in the 1940s, is that he is now given a different platform to make his arguments. A platform that was deliberately, intentionally denied A.A. Taylor, denied other scholars of that period. But part of what is true is, and this is why Carnegie Woodson story is so fascinating, I tell my students, Carnegie Woodson, a Harvard PhD, would not sign the contract that most white historians wanted to sign.
That's right.
There are certain things you leave out. And if you read his letters, he is unapologetic in this. And so he said, you will not hire me, I'll create my own.
That's right.
So the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History becomes one, not the only platform. There were other organizations formed at the same time here where this takes place. Let's go back to where I started. J.W.E. Bowman. The Atlanta Cotton States Exposition was supposed to be an occasion to celebrate the New South. Was supposed to be an occasion to talk about the collaboration between the Negro and the white Southerner. Many of us know the takeaway from that occasion is the 1895 Atlanta Cotton States Exposition. But while meeting there in Piedmont Park, they also worked on history. Looking closely at the Negro exhibitions that were there. Those were interventions. J.W.E. Bowen thought there was an important platform to speak about an authentic and accurate history of Africa. Now, if you go back to the proceedings, they did not get everything right, but they were going in the right direction. It is also the occasion, institutional building. So the Atlanta Cotton States Exposition, the National Medical Association, is formed in Atlanta. So you're right, Professor. Part of this effort is to create entities and platforms and organizations to tell our own story. Recognizing these other platforms mean that one must concede certain emphasis, certain facts, certain arguments. And so part of what we see is all of this is an intervention on the part about history, but also an intervention about who tells the story. That is what R.W. Wells was saying in our article. For too long, others have told our story.
Yes, sir.
If you let them tell it, you will be disappointed.
Yes, sir.
With what is written and published.
Yes.
Robert Jackson?
Thank you.
I'll put another point about that. It's often overlooked. So we talk about the brother in the back of the books that were published So we often know the author on the front cover of these books, right? That's who gets the credit. That is not always who does the work. And so, if you look very closely, and I have, at one point I was doing research on the books published by the Associated Press, by Carr Wilson. And you look closely at the people employed in the office of the Association for Negro Life and History, largely women, who conducted the research and clerical work. If you look closely at the book Black Reconstruction is published while Du Bois is a professor at Atlanta University. And many other researchers were young women who did a lot of the background research that later becomes this mammoth publication of Black Reconstruction. You're exactly right. There are many more scholars one can cite who've been largely overlooked both then and now.
Just a quick point on that. One of the first publications of the association, even before Miseducation, was Sadie Iola Daniels. Sadie Iola Daniels, Women's Builders.
Yes, indeed. A book that's hard to find now. I've been looking for it originally.
Some years ago, I was very fortunate to attend a national conference of the Association for Negro Life and History in Durham, North Carolina, and had the opportunity to see what could probably be best described as a low-grade confrontation between John O. Franklin and John Henry Clark.
Come on, brother.
It was low grade? You said Dr. Clark?
Oh, yeah.
It can't be low grade.
Dignified, brother. Dignified.
Which brings me to my question, in terms of public intellectuals. One of the officers and founders of our organization is one of the person that I consider one of my mentors, and he often refers to a certain public individual as Skip the Truth.
You talking about my mentor now? Dr. Henry Louis Gates, the historian, who has no degree in history. The undergraduate, he does.
Right. So, and Dr. Gates has recently done a TV program on Reconstruction. And I'm wondering if you could, in light of what has been said, reflect on that.
That production and the publication that ensued were not written for us.
No question.
And so I stopped watching, honestly.
Careful, man, record this.
I stopped watching it because there were too many cuts across the field that overlooked some important topics. And the thing is, and I know how these PBS publications work, there's so much on the editing floor that's overlooked. But the problem is this. The takeaway of most people, was amazing in looking how that thing rolled out. It was the introduction to the Reconstruction for most people for the first time. I was actually astonished how many people said they had no idea of Reconstruction. And what they now know about Reconstruction is the PBS series.
Yes, sir.
By Gates. So part of what I do know, Gates becomes a door we got to go through. It sets the stage for far more research. One of the topics that I think is mentioned but not in direct content is how does Reconstruction come to an end? So Professor Gates takes Reconstruction to 1900, and I can see merit in that. But to what degree is Reconstruction deliberately thwarted through racial terrorism? And how does one look at what occurred on July 4, 1876, across the river from my hometown, in Augusta, at a black town called Hamburg, built by black people, led by black people. And on the eve of an election, a group called the Red Shirts come to that community with the intent of killing the leading figures. And what happens in Hamburg is it repeated in many other communities. There now needs to be greater research about the terror inflicted on black people to undermine this period. There needs to be greater research about the protest of feet of black people. So how many know of the direct connection between Arkansas and South Carolina? There's a direct connection in the Delta of Arkansas and communities like Greenwood and 96, where people in the mid-1870s leave South Carolina in an earlier Great Migration. So there needs to be greater research and attention to that. There needs to be greater research about one of my most influential figures of the movement, a native of South Carolina. And I didn't watch it, Dr. Galway, so was he mentioned?
I couldn't watch it either.
Okay, I don't know if he was. But they were not. A great oversight. Henry McNeil Turner, a chaplain in the Union Army.
Yes, sir.
Henry McNeil Turner, an elected member of the Georgia legislature who is dismissed from his job before he could ever hold a seat. Henry McNeil Turner, who championed a Back to Africa movement before Marcus Garvey, who influenced a man in New Orleans named Robert Charles.
Take your time on that.
Henry McNeil Turner, who championed that God is a Negro.
That's right.
Henry McNeil Turner, who championed armed combat. Not mentioned. Also not mentioned, I thought surprising given the focus of Professor Gates on South Carolina. And so go back a moment. So when you have these publications, and movies, documentaries like Gates, and you have things like the extraordinary African American Museum in Washington, it's astonishing me the things that are missing in these extraordinary. So what's missing is this man, C.C. Scott, and I suppose no one would have heard of him before. Charles Chaplin Scott was a professor on this campus at Clafin University in the 1880s and 1890s. But Charles Chaplin Scott is an 1876 graduate of the University of South Carolina. Nowhere mentioned in that documentary, and I checked this, was there ever any indication about the impact of a powerful 1868 Constitution written by African Americans in South Carolina that affirmed citizenship rights, but also said every school that receives public funding must be open to every resident, male resident, without regard to race or previous condition. And so between 1873 and 1877, the place where I worked, the University of South Carolina, was an historically black college. 90% of the students on the campus were African American. And they are dismissed from the campus in 1877. C.C. Scott was one of those persons. So in 1911, this gentleman, what should I say?
ADISA.
Got it. He asked earlier about U.B. Phillips, and then I mentioned the name of William Dunning. William Dunning had a student whose last name was Taylor. And Taylor wrote a history of Reconstruction in South Carolina in 1910, which said between 1873 and 1877, the University of South Carolina was under radical rule. And the radical rule enabled incompetent, immoral students without any qualifications to enroll in the university and tear it up. C.C. Scott, at that time a prominent Methodist minister, wrote this. You can't read it. This is a response to the book written by Taylor. He says, well, I beg to differ. I was a student on that campus. And I want to tell you about the people who influenced us. I want to tell you about Robert Brown Elliott, who I knew. I want to tell you about a man named Jonathan Jasper Wright, the first African-American member of the South Carolina Supreme Court who started a law school on this campus, Clafin. I want to tell you about my professor. And my professor's name was Richard Theodore Greener,
Wow.
who was the first African-American graduate that we know of Harvard College, who served on the faculty between 1873, 1877, and in 1876 received his law degree from the University of South Carolina. I want to tell you about all of these individuals who are not referenced at all in your publication. So in 1911, C.C. Scott writes a letter to the editor, that's it, in the state newspaper, the leading newspaper in South Carolina, offering a different interpretation of Reconstruction. An interpretation of Reconstruction that is not included in the path-breaking work of Henry Lewis Gates. Now notice this, let me say that one time. That's how it was held, path-breaking. And I do not believe, Brother Goldman, that Gates acknowledges in any detail any of the people that I just mentioned. Yes, sir.
Outstanding presentation, a lot of information that, in detail that I did not know about the Reconstruction period. Only thing that I do know is that this constant Caucasian backlash for any gain that we have made. Anytime that we take some steps forward, they knock us 4 or 5 steps backward. I'm a product of affirmative action. And I came on the Milwaukee Fire Department because of affirmative action. And many firefighters came in, police officers came in the 70s, which of course, after that, those consent decrees and so forth were eliminated. And they started hiring as they had did previously. So there's many cities, particularly in the fire service, I can't speak too much about the police department, because they needed brothers and sisters, and particularly brothers, to police our communities which are still segregated. So when you talk about Reconstruction, you talk about any other time there was some steps made to forward us in this system. The Europeans who run this system tries to kick us back. My contention is, get our own. I'm a sovereigntist. I believe in African sovereignty. And because of that, it's hard for me to deal with this constant European, Caucasian, white backlash. Just as you've seen because of the election of Barack Obama. You've seen that backlash happen, where because of Trump being elected, the emboldenedness of white folks who are just now in various areas, in various schools, and within the public. So, I appreciate this history, and I admire the men and women of that time. But once again, just as my brother said, it shouldn't be about nation building, institutional building. Because to me, that's what reparations is about. To prepare us to establish institutions where we can function freely in to educate ourselves, to prepare ourselves to run our world. Because if we don't challenge ourselves to run our world, we'll always be begging those who are running this system, this world.
Now let me take that comment and tell you about a project I wish I had time for a student to take on. So, at some point in the last 2 years, I was working with Professor Sandy Derrick at Duke University. He has a new book coming out in the spring. I've seen it, about reparations. Part of what Dr. Derrick does is look at the history of deprivation of black people. And one of the stories included is this scene here. Anyone ever heard of a man named Garrison Frazier? Reverend Garrison Frazier, you're not even talking. Reverend Garrison Frazier was a Baptist minister, a native of South Carolina. But on January 12, 1865, he heard there was an important man in Savannah whose name was William T. Sherman. And he holds court with Sherman and other members of Abraham Lincoln's cabinet. And the question emerges, what do you all want? What do you seek? What do you need to enable you to be free? And Garrison Frazier says, we need land of our own. The first response was not voting, not schooling, but we need a land till on our own. Many of us know about the federal policy, Bill Order number 15. 4 acres from you. That did not emerge in the mind of Lincoln or Howard. That was a direct request of the Freedmen. Garrison Fraser was one of those. So what do you all want? Let's look at Charleston.
Yes, sir.
1865.
Yes, sir.
You're now free by law. What do you want? Well, we simply desire that we should be recognized as men, with no obstructions placed in our way. The same laws which govern white men should direct colored men, that we have the right of trial, jury of our peers, that schools be open or established for our children, that we be permitted to acquire homesteads for ourselves and children, that we be dealt with as others in equity and justice. Charleston, 1865. Now just imagine, I know it's hard to imagine. Imagine if that platform had been properly enacted. If you know anything about the history of Reconstruction, you would know that this is dead on arrival. Which is precisely why this issue of the wave of violence is so crucial. Because literally with every inch made, miles of pushback. And in that degree of the history of racial terror, many of you talked about what happened in Oklahoma and Tulsa. But let's go back some more decades and speak about the tragedies inflicted on black people well before that period. And as a personal investment here that I want to mention, that's greener, those are the students. I want to talk about this for a moment. So, I know Bobby Jackson was there. A year ago, maybe 2 years now, you know, a lot of these universities are trying to make amends for their role in slavery, right? Some people give out money, some people give out monuments. Our university gave out monuments. And we installed 2 very basic markers on our main quad, our horseshoe. And the university has prepared, I played no role in any of that, did not want to play a role in any of that.
Symbolism without substance.
I agree with that. And the day before, a colleague of mine named James Clafin, congressman, called me and asked, could I do him a favor? He told me he could not get back to Columbia to be the keynote speaker, and would I step in? And I was torn. For those who were there, I reminded people at the university that I was not simply an African-American professor, but I was the heir of those who were enslaved people in South Carolina. And one of the names that I called out, and I called it out, Brother Carr, today when we did the libations, was this man, whose name was Alec Williams. We called him Alex, but we called him Alec. Alec Williams, who was the Negro constable in 1876 in a town called Ellington, South Carolina, which was later dismissed and uprooted with the development of the Savannah River site, what we call it the bomb plant. But my great-great-grandfather, Alec, was a founder of the Republican Party in Aiken County. And in 1876, he called upon his neighbors to take up arms, this article mentions that, against white vigilantes who were going around trying to intimidate black voters.
You gotta read that second paragraph, man. Read that out loud. Hammond Rouse spoke.
So Alec Williams was the next speaker. That's my great-grandfather, the man you just saw. He said the white people said that they would have hell in their guns, but he had hell at the muzzle of his gun.
Yes, sir.
And he said the first man that interfered with him or that carried anything out of the meeting, he would shoot him down like a dog.
Yes, sir.
My great-grandfather said
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
As soon as the white men fired the first shot, the colored men were to pitch right in and kill from cradle up.
From the cradle up.
And run the white folks off the land and have it. What do you want?
What is it?
We want land.
Yes, sir.
We'll have it for ourselves. Hammond Rouse, a cousin,
Yes. Oh, okay.
spoke and said, let the white out the whole of Beach Island.
Yes, sir.
And the whites would start, the colored men would start too. And sow Beach Island down with grape and plow it up with bomb shells.
Come on, right?
Now, the reason I looked this up, I had no idea any of this. I knew my great-grandfather, his grandson. No one ever mentioned this. I came across this one day during teaching, and we were looking at Reconstruction, and I discovered that this man, Elliott Williams, in 1920, received a pension for serving in the Confederate Army.
Wow.
Served
Yes, sir.
in the Confederate Army. A man servant
Yes, sir. Under duress.
in the Confederate Army. So I started doing research. I said, who is this thing? I mean, I knew the name. And so with thorough research, we realized that he served in the Army to 1865. And right after that, Alec Williams, the former Confederate servant, crafts the Republican Party. A different party at that time in Aiken County. And then fight for his life. And then later, there was a series of Klan trials here in Columbia, in Columbia. And my great-grandfather testified about what he witnessed. Now that in of itself is bold. You go on public record and name the individual who told the story. So when we unveiled the slave markers at the university, I said, wait a minute.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I need you all to know who I am
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
and the legacy we stand on. And it's quite amazing. You have degrees in this field, and I can tell you a lot about everybody else, but my own people.
Sorry.
And that's precisely what I do love to underscore. The need now for young people to know the doors through which they walk.
Yes, sir.
And that was precisely the mission of someone like Carr G. Woodson. As much as we know about Carr G. Woodson's publications, has anyone ever seen what was called a Negro History Toolkit?
Oh, yes.
These were kits created to teach in the public schools around this country that were then disseminated through Masonic orders, Negro Teachers Associations, because they understood precisely the received instruction in most of the assigned textbooks in classes. So always, institution building is a way of intervention.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I want you to go back. You spoke about the discussion that they had. One of the scholars that you mentioned about having black people into legislation, and I think you said some people thought they should have been in schools, rather they were incompetent legislators when they should have been in school. Could you kind of go over what was happening during that period?
Well, they did they did all the above. I mean, part of what people understood, you have to be multifaceted. Okay. And a perfect example of this is someone who's now lifted up as a hero of American history. This man, Robert Smalls. Robert Smalls did not know how to make his subject and verbs agree, but he knew he was free. So Robert Smalls, who in most people's assessments was an unlearned, uneducated leader, is also the same Robert Smalls who argues forcefully for that 1868 Constitution. He's also the same Robert Smalls who in 1895 stands in Columbia resisting. So a progressive document is the 1868 Constitution of South Carolina. Open the doors for the University of South Carolina. But I invite you to read the 1895 Constitution. It's explicit in seeking to turn the clock back on Reconstruction. It was a constitution advocated for by the man in stone whose name was Benjamin Pitchfork Tillman, who from his governor's desk and in the halls of Congress championed lynching as a social arbiter of control. And he put forward a new constitution. But Robert Smalls stands up and says, listen, I know who I am. I know our history. I know what we witnessed. All we need is, quote, a simple chance in the battle of life. You give that to us, we can prove you wrong. So this was Ben Tillman's argument.
Look carefully now at this. He said the 1868 Constitution, the one written by Robert Smalls and others, was, quote, made by aliens.
Yes, sir.
Negroes
Yes, sir.
and natives. Here we go again. Without character. Here
Yes, sir.
recommendation. Here we go.
Yes.
All the enemies of South Carolina.
That's true.
And this Constitution, written by Negroes and their people,
Yes.
was designed to degrade our state,
That's right.
our people,
That's right.
our civilization.
That's right. White.
So one day in my class, I stopped and looked at my students, and I said, Mr. Goldman, I want you to define our.
Yes, sir. Take your time. Take your time. Yes.
By the way, the majority of the citizens of South Carolina in 1895 were black.
Yes, sir.
And
What
so,
did they say? What did they say?
the students,
Yeah.
oh, it took them a minute. I teach at USC, not SEC.
I know it. That's what I'm saying.
So that's precisely. Now, to show you how this all shifts and turns, and I'm glad Professor Collins in the front row reminded me of something. Institution building. Has anyone ever heard of SNCC?
Yes.
What's SNCC? No.
Not that. Oh.
Not that. Not that SNCC. Not the SNCC of April 1960. I want to talk about the SNCC of October 1946. The other SNCC called the Southern Negro Youth Congress.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
The Southern Negro Youth Congress was a meeting of the African diaspora,
That's right.
where African people from around the world came to Columbia, South Carolina.
Doing it, man.
And they met at the largest venue in the city at the time, called the Township Auditorium, which had a capacity of about 3,500 people. So black people from around the world and white students, high school and college, including a delegation from SC State and Clafin, came to the Township Auditorium for a meeting, notice this, the Southern Youth Legislature.
Yes, sir.
And they were basing their gathering on Reconstruction. And so they meet in the Township Auditorium to address prejudice, voting, Jim Crow segregation in October of 1946. But before gathering at the Township Auditorium, one of their teachers was a woman named Majeska Monteith Simmons. And she held a series of workshops at a historic African-American school called Harbison Junior College.
Come on, brother. Come on, brother.
Which is now a state institution called Midlands Tech. But in August of 1946, she invited students to this campus to prepare them for the legislature. And she developed a curriculum. So if you are the teacher for SNCC, the first SNCC, and you want to prepare race-conscious students,
Yes, sir.
what then do you teach during the course of that summer? So we found the curriculum. So what do you teach
Come on.
a student? You teach them how to win the battle,
Yes, sir.
defending our rights, world affairs. You teach them about a job program. You teach them about the history of the Negro in politics. How do you prepare them? You teach public speaking. You teach parliamentary procedure. You teach public relations. What do you teach? You teach songs. You teach how to produce handbills. You teach how to write press releases. You teach them about the art of mimeography.
Yes, sir.
And right there I had to stop talking to my students. How many have heard of mimeography? Not one hand. So I had to explain mass production of bills. So that is what was taught to those students in Columbia in 1946. These are some of those students. One of those students was one of those teachers was this woman here, whose name was Mrs. Wilson. Her name was Ma Wilson, who taught social studies at Benedict College. In 1946, she was a teacher of the Southern Negro Youth Congress. Most people in Columbia do not remember Mom Wilson. They know her granddaughter, whose name is Asia Wilson.
Oh,
Another
yeah.
star
Basketball.
athlete on the campus. Now, to show you how we close the dots here, and now we pause and conclude. This is the stage of the Township Auditorium in 1946. So for this meeting of the Southern Negro Youth Congress, around the entire auditorium were 6-foot-tall photographs. Who was on the wall? Robert Brown Elliott, Robert Small, Jonathan Jasper Wright. The students met surrounded, literally, by Reconstruction figures. Literally surrounded. On that Saturday, they meet at the township. And the speaker that Saturday was a man named Paul Robeson.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That was Saturday night. And not to be outdone, they conclude the deliberations on Sunday. And they meet at Tisdale Chapel on the campus of Benedict College. And the concluding speaker was the old man himself,
Yes, sir.
Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yes, sir.
And he delivers a powerful speech called Behold the Land. In the speech, he reviews the history of Reconstruction. In the speech, he condemns the white leadership of South Carolina. And in the speech, he encourages the students there to learn their history to prepare them for the battlefield.
Wow.
And he said the battlefield is in the American South,
That's right.
fighting injustice.
That's right.
And he said the foot soldiers in the battle will be young people
Yes.
who know their history.
Yes.
The Southern Negro Youth Congress met 14 years
Yes, sir.
before the SNCC that we just talked about.
That's right. Is that Esther Cooper Jackson?
That's Esther, who's still living.
Still alive. Her papers are at Medgar Evers. We talked about the
Esther Cooper Jackson invited
She lives in
boys
Brooklyn.
to come to the campus.
Wow.
She was an organizing leader. There was another woman whose name was Dorothy Burnham.
Yes.
And we invited Dorothy Burnham back to Columbia 3 years ago at 103 for the 70th anniversary of the Southern Negro Youth Congress.
Of course, Esther Cooper Jackson is the co-founder of Freedom Ways, edited by John Henry Clark.
I have a question for you, but before I do that, I want to say, I think you have done excellently well and spoken so eloquently about the Reconstruction era. But I think the greatest plus I must give you today is you have highlighted those scholars who were not celebrated over time. I thank you for that. But my question is this: as one who would like to do a comparative analysis of the Pan-African scholars who have written so well of the Reconstruction era, I would like you, as an intellectual scholar, to point to me one Caucasian who wrote a book on the Reconstruction that, from your perspective, was so closest to the truth from your perspective. Point out scholars from your profession, so I can, and my people can do a comparative analysis.
Well, let me tell you something to read. Read Kenneth Stanton. Kenneth Stanton. Read C-Van Woodward. And the book that many argue, and I don't necessarily agree wholeheartedly, that gets closest to Black Reconstruction is a book by Eric Foner, who, by the way, is the scholar of record for Henry Louis Gates.
That's that. Right?
Yeah.
That's that. Right?
Yeah. So read closely. Eric Foner, F-O-N-E-R. C-Van Woodward. Kenneth Stanton. And I'll give you my card because I have a much longer list that I just can't call right now. But somebody else I want you to look at real quick. I know it's time to go. I want you to look. Let me go back. The History of Reconstruction, written by Martin Delaney. Martin Delaney.
That's all right.
A History of Reconstruction, written by a native of Winsboro named Kelly Miller,
Yes, sir.
who was denied entrance to the University of South Carolina. But also this woman, and I wish I had a graduate student, Dr. Boutte, who could do this. Miss Hilda Grayson Finney. You all see that name? Ernest A. Finney Junior Auditorium. Mrs. Finney was his stepmother, and she taught here in Orangeburg. And she created, based on Carnegie Woodson, her own series of Negro history toolkits that were created to challenge the South Carolina history textbook that was required to be taught in South Carolina. Now that textbook was written by a woman for over 50 years. It was called the Sims History of South Carolina. And the Sims History of South Carolina said that slavery was a benevolent institution. The Sims History of South Carolina said that Reconstruction was a terrible travesty that was only saved by the valiant Clafin who came to the defense of white people. The Sims textbook said that African Americans were content being in segregation. And Ms. Finney said not so. So she creates her own series of textbooks and later teaches Negro African American history in Southern California, in Los Angeles.
One of my ancestors, Lee Nance from Newberry, was a delegate to the 1868 conference. And Lee Nance. And one of I forget the author of the History of Newberry County in 2 volumes. Actually, I had an opportunity to ask him when I was doing family history, and he said Lee Nance was just there, he didn't accomplish that. Yeah. But then he did enough that he was assassinated by some Democratic operatives. But my question, right quick, is...
Your relative was assassinated?
Yes. My question is, in a comparison to where we are now, Rayford Logan described the period after Reconstruction as the nadir. Are we in Reconstruction or the nadir right now?
What was that?
I'm trying to figure out that's a rhetorical question. It's the nadir. Absolutely. I mean, part of it, but it's both.
But explain what the nadir is.
So Rayford Logan, another pioneering historian, Howard, talked about all the phenomenal achievements of Reconstruction, the promises of that are chiseled away, and the nadir becomes its lowest point. So if you look at this window of time, when all of these scholars are writing, so if you look from Bowen up to Du Bois in the 30s, it is where the franchise is being stripped away. It is where education is being dismantled. It is where extracting forms of labor are being in place, and it's the highest point of racial violence and lynching. That's what it means, and he documents all that as impediments to black progress. So, violence on the incline, police brutality, the stripping of the black vote. However, we didn't state it. That's why the history is so important. What are the tools one needs, as I showed you in Southern Negro Youth Congress? If you believe everything I just outlined is an impossible and insurmountable barrier, then you are stuck.
Right.
But history says otherwise. And if you don't know it, you are stuck.
So would you say that that is a tool for white supremacy, is to not know your real history?
Precisely. Where's Bobby Jackson? Last night, I couldn't be here because I was at another event in Columbia. There's this group called Ward 1. And it's a community, like many communities next to colleges in this country, that was uprooted during urban renewal and college expansion. And Bobby Jackson's father was a graduate of the local high school in Columbia called Booker T. Washington in 1950. And I gave some remarks last night, and I got to a point in my presentation where I spoke about this interventionist teacher at Booker Washington's principal, whose name was J. Andrew Simmons. And I talked about how Simmons was described as a man ahead of his time. But in doing so, he inculcated race consciousness in his students. And one of the things he would do on a regular basis was that he would recite a poem, Creeping to the Ground. Though born poor and low, thank God a man can grow. And as I was reciting, Barbara Jackson's father stood up and recited it too.
Come on.
And another woman who graduated in 1947, she cited the same thing.
Yes.
And what they reminded us was that although the university, the city of Columbia, and public housing tore down every house, every store,
Come on, brother.
every school, every business, they made a mistake. They just scraped the surface. They didn't touch the roots. But if you do not know there are roots below that surface, then your point is underscored. And I do believe, having taught freshmen from around the state of South Carolina, they have been duped and bamboozled.
Come on.
In the public schools of this state. And that is intentional.
Come on, brother.
Now, I gotta go before I get in trouble.
No, sir. This is the place you can do. Say place.
I just wanted to go back to the question that the brother had back there. The brother asked that question. But historically, I remember when General Sherman went to march to the sea, where they established a black government of ex-slaves who were uneducated. They had their own president, they had their own legal legislation.
Yes, sir.
They had their own militia
Yes,
also.
sir.
And that's the thing that I want.
You know where it is? It's called a Hilton Head.
Right. What's right.
It's called Mitchellville.
Right. And I
Precisely.
got a slide there.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to say that it wasn't always the educated black man that started these governments.
They had a charter that created an infrastructure.
Exactly.
Not only the church, but a school system, a police force, and a militia.
Exactly.
Crucial.
And what the brother back here was saying, going back to his point into why it came to the point when you had to have a Dr. King or Malcolm X. And it was because when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, you had President Johnson, who was a Southern sympathizer.
Come on.
Once he decided that Reconstruction, he made an announcement, Reconstruction is over.
Right.
So what happens when you do that? You take the protection of the federal government away from these small institutions.
That's right.
So the reason why black people were able to vote down here, even as ex-slaves, is because you had the federal government and the military down here making sure that was happening. As soon as they started removing those soldiers from down here, that's when all the chaos started happening.
April 11th, 1877, at 12 noon, Robert Small said it felt like his life was a rope of sand. Because he understood without the military apparatus in place, they would go back to where they were. That's precisely what happened. So you mentioned this black town. I want you to underscore this for a moment about steps back and forth. These black towns were created in that area of land of field number 15, from Wilmington to Jacksonville. Today, those black towns, you mentioned Mitchellville, is now Hilton Head, is now Edisto Beach, is now this island called Keel, is now Amelia Island of Fernandina, which is now Choice Prime Area, which were black towns and communities. And there is little that documents those places. And so Mitchellville is a group now fighting against odds to now remind people that what is now the Western and Port Royal and Hilton Head was once called Mitchellville.
Yes, sir.
A town for black people, by black people.
And General Sherman was the one that asked them, he said, what do you need to be free?
Yeah. So
before they went there.
So that's what the garrison fraser focused on.
Exactly. And they told them, we want land. They said, well, and General Sherman wrote to President Lincoln and said, hey.
What did Johnson say?
Johnson said,
that's too rapid.
That's too much.
Yeah, the Benson in his book, it's like a good account of garrison fraser.
What thing did you say?
Benson.
So you asked me about the white scholars. Now, the book that awakened me in Augusta, Georgia, 2 books. One book was called There Is a River.
That's right, brother.
By Vincent Hart. The other book that really awakened me, because I had to read it for an assignment, was a book called Born to Rebel.
Oh, 96.
Written by beside Benjamin Elijah Mays, who witnessed his first awakening was racial terror in a place called Phoenix. Benjamin Mays was born the same year as my great-grandfather. And I had to write a piece about black life in the late 19th century. And Mays' book was the only book I could find that resembled my grandfather. What's astonishing, if you were to come with me right now, I did that project when I was in 9th grade. I went to the Donaldson Public Library and I checked out that book, Born to Rebel. If you were to come with me right now to my office on campus, you would see that book on my bookshelf. That was over 30 years ago. I checked out the book, Born to Rebel, from the Donaldson Public Library, and I never returned it. Because it had that much of an impact on me. So every institution I've been, including the University of South Carolina, is in my face. Because you need it to be in your face. Born to Rebel. Now, Brother Goldman, I think I've done what you asked me to do. Thank you.
Just for a moment, to give him the honor that he's due as he prepares to present. So Dr. Carr is the International First Vice President of ASCAC. He grew up in ASCAC really from the early 90s? Early 90s, yes. And that's right. That's right. It's the chair of the Department of African American Studies at Howard University. And we all know him as someone who really has a heart. His heart is with African people and for the liberation of African people. He is a devout scholar, a very disciplined scholar, and you will see his brilliance as he presents today if you've not seen it before. And one of the things that's important to know about Dr. Carr is that over the time that he has studied, he's been consistent. Very consistent, will delve deeply into the deep cradles of the text, but also has sat at the foot of many of our elders, many of whom are now ancestors. And you will hear that in the way that he presents. And so we really just want to pause for just a moment just to honor Dr. Carr as he comes forward. So let's welcome him.
Really, because the first elder that many of us in ASCAC recognize who had the fortune of coming through Columbus, Ohio, is Dr. Maurice Kelson. Of course, so let's give him a round of applause. We already set the stage. And he jumped up, moves faster than I do, he was 94, come up here and remind everyone to support our ASCAC Building Fund if you don't already. Many supporters in here, but please do, because one of the reasons that we don't have somebody harassing us, Dr. Adams, telling us we ain't got to go home, but we got to get the hell out of this room, is because this is controlled by black people. And at some point, there needs some brick and mortar. And so it's very nice to be in this space. This is very much reminiscent of the many black institutions we have been at least in the years since we were brought into ASCAC through the African Center for Study and Worship in East Columbus as a study group of the association. And we've been to many black colleges since then, and many of those schools have been here in the South. Many times we've been in South Carolina, in fact. And the first time I came here was Columbia. We were at Allen, Richard Allen. Right, brother? Oh my God. That was that ice storm that trapped everybody for 4 days. Nobody could get out. Everybody gained weight eating that soul food over there across the street from Allen and Benedict. That was a beautiful time. But just being in that chapel, and that was before it was restored even, but to have, you know how the AME do it. So all the bishops of the AME church just circling, Henry Turner and everybody else there, Morris Brown. And it's just a magical moment. And then we returned several times for regionals, for conferences, and then we came back in 2005. That was the year after Baba Jetty made transition, Vic Perella's, and that's when we moved the World History Project from him to Asa Hilliard. We forget Asa brought a bunch of students from Atlanta. And we talked about Antoinette Furman, who was kind of like the Sheikh on the joke of the 19th century. And again, And so it's good to be back in South Carolina, the first state to secede from the Union.
Okay.
Home, John C. Calhoun, who I love and admire, but one reason and one reason only. He was very clear about who we were, who he was. We are not friends, we are enemies. You get my question? Say it again. And Kathy Adams, who is, as we heard in one of the 5 presentations we heard this morning, the first one happening rather on social media. This hashtag thing is real big on social media, so we made a hashtag called HBCU Master Teachers. Catherine Adams is the finest example of that hashtag and that concept that any of us are ever going to see. And as I tweeted that out while you were presenting, somebody responded like, yeah, I saw her put Penny College on her back. Which is absolutely true. The old college. So we should give you now another round of applause. You know you were a collective, but that's really important. Absolutely. And so part of the reason, as you said, you chose to link up with these folks here is that you ain't got to do it by yourself anymore. And that's why it's important for us to support institutions. So it's hard to do work by yourself. And that's why it's also important for us to have physical places to do work. So as Barbara Marie will remind us, please support the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations Building Fund. No amount is too small, or as he would say, too large to give, so that we can get some brick and mortar and some grass and some porch somewhere to sit down and do some work. And asking Dr. Castellano, Dr. Gallman, Dr. Bernie, and Sister Reva, as we were coming from the airport, I'm trying to do the math in my head because sometimes I get loopy and forget the math. I think it's the Southern Region's time. You want to talk about that tomorrow. I love coming to the South for ASCAC. Yeah, when we were in Tuskegee in 1997, I still rate that. I don't rate any experience we've had in the association any higher than the days we spent in Tuskegee, Alabama, on the campus of Tuskegee for our conference. Yes, and really a powerful time. So I'm going to only have 6 slides, so I figured by now we would be completely saturated, and I'm pleasantly surprised, not surprised, pleasantly confirmed in that. Today has been a remarkable day. We packed about a 3-day conference into 1 day, but the way it was done and the way it was done has allowed us to think through some things. So some of this will be repetition, some will be extension. I got pages of notes and cards just from today. So rather than go through all of these responses and all of these reactions to much of what has been said, I'm going to let these slides kind of drive the conversation and keep going. On the left, of course, we heard earlier from and about Robert Elliott. And there are people in this room, of course, including this brother sitting right here in front of me, who know Robert Elliott's story much better than I do and could talk about it a lot. And Dr. Donaldson really helped us this morning by laying a framework that reminds me of when I think the region began to think through this theme particularly. And I guess earlier this year, I guess we were all together at the national meeting in New York, and then the conversation began to bubble about how to talk about Reconstruction. And we all know that's very popular, and that's very something people are talking about a lot these days. And we're going to talk about it some more. But what our brother did this morning, what Brother Bobby did this morning, I think was just remarkable. And for anybody who didn't know, and I'm glad, did you take that one? Good, because I need a copy of that to show students, not just students, but a lot of our friends who have now stumbled upon or backed into Reconstruction as a topic and have decided that they're going to do well while doing good and make a profit off being the ones who discovered this unknown part of African American history. Well, it's never been unknown to the women and men in this room. And so one of the things Dr. Donaldson could not possibly have known is how much what he discussed this morning has been discussed over and over again in association conferences, study groups, so forth and so on. So we show us Mark Delane, we just smile, because we go out there every other May. We'll be going this May, Memorial Day. Mark Delane is great, because that's what ASCAC does. But Robert Elliott, and I thought that second book he was going to name, after he named Vincent Harding, and I didn't know Vincent Harding well. I'm assuming some of you all did know him rather well. particularly since he spent a lot of time in Atlanta, where he started the Institute of the First of the Black World, right after Dr. King was assassinated, and the students, and, you know, it's wonderful, again, your students cat here, think about the student movement after Dr. King was killed, and some of them wanted to name the whole of the Atlanta University Center to Martin Luther King University. And you know the Negroes wasn't gonna go for that. But they did allow a brother who had been teaching for a while in the AUC, Spelman College, among others, to go and try to start the Martin Luther King Center. And so Vincent Harding did that. But when that didn't go the way he intended to go, because he was really a scholar activist, you know, he was what I guess these Negroes now call public-facing intellectual. He then took his energy and channeled it into something called the Institute of the Black World. And the Institute of the Black World ended up being one of the most important think tanks we've had. And some of those elders still walk the earth. Vincent Harding, his wife Rosemary, made transition some time ago, but we went out to Denver one time and spent a back end of a weekend, part of a weekend with him, and just sitting with just such a gracious spirit. You know, you feel it when you read his book, There Is a River. So that was the first one he named. And the second one he named, I thought he was going to go for this one right here, because this is the one that, think about chapter 3 on South Carolina. This, of course, is the great Jerome Bennett Jr., Black Power USA, the human side of Reconstruction. That's him on the right with his pipe in his mouth. 2 years after this book came out, when he was sitting in his senior editor's office at Ebony Magazine in a building that Black people no longer own on Michigan Avenue. I mean, although John Johnson's private library was rescued by my friend Theaster Gates, the artist, who went to Linda Johnson Rice, and like, can I have the old Ebony magazines and can I have the library? And she said yes. So if you ever get to Southside Chicago, Stony Island Arts Bank, you can see the library of John H. Johnson. Again, support the building fund, because Theaster Gates was able to get a building, an old bank on the south side of Chicago, and trick it out. You go upstairs and Mr. Johnson's whole library is there, including all the old bound volumes of Ebony magazine. And so in some ways, the spirit of the Jerome Bennett still has a physical place to rest.
Do they have the jet beauty of the beach?
Let me know when you're in Chicago next time, Oshie. We'll go up there together. And I'll engage the white dude who was the librarian up there for another time. And while he's talking to me, you can go through and check. And if they've been ripped out, we'll then leave there and go to every barber shop in Chicago. Because if it's like the ones I grew up in, brother, that's where they are. But at any rate, but the point is, there's a place for those things. There's a place for those things, and we need a place. And so the Jerome Bennett Jr.'s office, I never got a chance to, I didn't know the Jerome Bennett. I met him one time. We were up there, and I was in an old bookstore over there by, across street from Powell's bookstore. It isn't there anymore, west side of Chicago, 57th Street. And I'm on my hands and knees looking for books, and I looked over and saw some expensive looking church shoes, and then I followed the slacks up, and there's Jerome Bennett with his arms crossed looking at books. And I said, Jerome Bennett? He was like, hey, brother, what you doing? I said, I'm hunting Lincoln, brother. He was working on his book that became Forced into Glory, where he took on the whole Lincoln Mafia. Because Jerome Bennett said Abraham Lincoln is a racist and y'all can't say it. Right. But every year, dozens of books and articles come out on Abraham Lincoln, and that whole thing formed against Jerome Bennett. Jerome Bennett said, I don't care, bring everybody, just like that quote Donaldson read today, how many guns you got? Because I got guns too. And Jerome Bennett was one of the great intellectuals, but he wrote this book, Black Power USA, about Robert Elliott and his friends, the women and men in South Carolina who reconstructed this state. And when he talks about it in chapter 3, South Carolina, post-bellum paradise for Negroes, he says this state was as close as it got to black people having paradise in America, and it didn't last long, but in that brief moment, Reconstruction in this little corner of the country looked like the possibility of black humanity without restriction. And in that moment, they didn't take revenge on white people. They tried to drag them along into humanity as well. But we all know what happened. We're not going to repeat what Dr. Donaldson said this morning. I can talk more about Elliott, but I won't, because the hour is getting long, and we can have some conversation, and I don't intend on talking long today. So let's continue. We got to pay Joe Biden, we got to pay respect to where we are. The southern region, as I said, you know, it's interesting. There have been a number of histories of hip hop written, and one of the ones I use when I teach the hip hop class, and I tell the students at the beginning at Howard, I say, I'm too old to be teaching a class on hip hop. Really am. If the class is about who was your favorite hip hop artist, But if the class is about how Africans make meaning and culture and how they deal with music and tradition and art and this kind of thing, then I'm not trying to stay current. I'm just trying to get us to think a little differently about how we think about what you're producing. And so in that process, there's a book that we use. I like the book, Jeff Chang's book, Can't Stop, Won't Stop. He's Chinese American, Asian American. And I always tell them, I begin by saying, if there's a better book than this, one of y'all gonna have to write it. Because he's writing as an outsider who is trying to acquire some information. And in a minute, we'll talk about another brother. The second book, actually, that Dr. Donaldson mentioned this morning, when he started talking about, well, no, actually, somebody, who asked him, who's the white historian who's come closest to telling the black story? Very good, that's very good. Well, I'm so sorry, you're gonna miss the answer to that question because me and him had a little fight down at the Museum of African American History and Culture about a month ago. I'll show you the picture, Eric Foner. But I thought it's very much enjoyable. But Jeff Chang's book, Jeff Chang is not African, but what he does in writing Can't Stop, Won't Stop is give us a broad scope of how hip hop comes out of the Caribbean, co-mingles in New York, and eventually spreads throughout the United States and beyond. But there's a region of this country, and we see the same thing in the Black Arts Movement, and there are people in this room who participated actively in the Black Arts Movement in terms of institutions. There's a region of the country where hip hop didn't take off immediately, but once it kind of took off there, it changed everything else. It's also the same region where you don't see the same number of Black arts institutions, Black art movement institutions, something in kind of Midwest. What do y'all think?
Density and emerging.
Okay, density and emerging. I think that's probably correct. Where are you more likely to see a student stand up to give an answer to a question that an old person asked them? The South or the North? Indeed, because the Africans who I brought here moved the least. So the culture here is probably closer, generally speaking, to the African gloss, to the African echo than it is other places. Not that it isn't other places, but that's really the point. So when we come to the southern region in ASCAC, this is the place where you almost have a feel for Africa that's very different than the other regions of the association, at least in my experience. You don't have to explain to black people so much about the fact that we need our own institutions. Not that we need to explain to people who are in our formation anyway, but here, it's just a natural thing. It's like a closer to a natural thing. So it's always good to be in the southern region. Clafin, of course, very important to be in Clafin. And of course, I mentioned the fact that this is where one place Sheikh Dr. Joe set foot on this continent was in the South. Was in Atlanta, the Nile Valley Conference. There he is with Andrew Young. And of course, this is the portrait, the painting that hangs in Morehouse College, Martin King Chapel. So it's very important to understand it. And of course, it's important to be at Claflin for any number of reasons. Claflin and South Carolina State University have a similar relationship, not the same, but similar enough to, it's kind of like Wilberforce and Central State University in Ohio. They are intertwined forever. It's in their DNA. And of course, right down the street, I decide and I walk down there, and I'll probably go back down there tomorrow morning or at some point to look at the monument to the Africans who lost their lives in police murder 50 years ago last year, the so-called Orangeburg Massacre. And we know that Orangeburg is an important center of black struggle. I'm gonna tell y'all that, we just heard that this morning. Yes?
Is he related to Elizabeth?
That's a good question.
No.
Is he?
No.
He's not?
Okay.
Okay, good, very good. Now that's important, because I didn't know that. Yeah, I want to see the mural. The building is open. It's an interesting book. Read a few years ago. I don't know if any of y'all know much about this association. John Potts Sr. wrote History of the Palmetto Education Association. Yeah, who knows anything about the Palmetto? Tell us about the Palmetto for a minute.
Palmetto Education Association was the association of black teachers in South Carolina when they were not allowed to join the South Carolina Teachers Association. And they were in favor of having salaries that were equitable because black teachers got paid a lot less than white. And also, the black teachers were not able to be activists. To be a member of the NAACP was grounds for dismissal.
Yes. Yes.
And they had a series of activists, presidents of that association. I'm proud to say my father was president of that association for a few years.
Wow.
And actually came up with some things that moved the association forward. In terms of organization, in the South Carolina Teachers Association in Columbia, they have a room dedicated to the Permanent Education Association, in which they actually are giving away that book.
Are they?
Yes.
I had to buy it. Which I don't have.
I went to a conference there and I was going to, because I had one, I lost it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to buy another one, and the lady just gave it to me.
Do you know that brother Al Tony Gilmore?
I don't.
Okay. I know that brother. I assume he's a brother. I never seen the picture. Thank you, Murray. That's very important. And again, this is the rich thing. Of course, when you said you were a member of the NAACP, that was grounds for dismissal. You know the most famous South Carolinian who got dismissed as a result of that, who freed her up to basically organize the educational wing of the civil rights movement. Yes. The great Septima Point. No question. His father's people are Haitian, of course. So this ADOS business is trash. But we're gonna get to that in a minute. I mean, we got a nationhood claim, but I'm so glad, Brother Ben, I'm so glad that you mentioned the fact that we have been talking about the fact that Africans in this country have a specific cultural identity, ethnicity, if you want to use that word, for a long time. So ADOS is not new on that point. But what is new is this anti-African nativism, this blackface white nativism. And we got to reach this generation of people who are not joining this African descendants of slaves or slavery, as you say, Bob, this wrong name to begin with, because they're against Africans from other places. They've been lured into something they don't understand. But yes, Septima Clark, no question, the great Septima Clark, who then, of course, when you call on Septima Clark, everybody else calls out Ella Joe Baker, Rosa Parks, who goes to Highlander Folk Institute to hang out with Septima Clark right after Emmett Till is killed, and then goes to Montgomery and says, why y'all push us around, I'm not gonna get off this bus. Septima Clark is at the center of that entire conversation with her citizenship education thrust, and that's the South Carolina school. Yes, sir, what are we gonna say?
I just want to say real quick.
No, please.
Somebody who,
you call an ancestor.
somebody who doesn't get enough attention is Majestic Simpson.
Oh yeah, no question. Majestic Simpson, no question. I mean, we could, and it's black women. We're not gonna reach any brothers except, as you said, I realize your father was for a time the president. Until we deal with the black men who are the heads of these segregated teachers associations, often because there's a male gloss. I mean, we picked up some bad habits since we've been here. The sisters are doing all this work. But his counterpart in Georgia, and Papa Reba, Mama Nadia, I don't know if anybody else might, did you know Dr. Tate, Horace Tate? You knew him? Of course you knew him. His wife is still alive. Horace Tate was president of Georgia's Teachers and Educators Association. Every state had one of these educators associations. South Carolina was Palmetto, and Georgia was the GTNEA. I had my students read this book by Vanessa Walker. I don't know any of y'all, you know, but she's at Emory. She's done a number of books on black educators and black education. Brilliant sister. She did a book called The Lost Education of Horace Tate. This book came out last year. In fact, I got a copy, the advanced copy, just before we left for Kemet back in 2018, and I put it in my bag, and I'm so glad I did, because I couldn't put it down. Because what you see is these black educators, as you said, you couldn't be out there in front, but it was them that organized all the legal challenges to Jim Crow. In this state, of course, it was Briggs versus Elliott. High school principals and teachers identifying model plaintiffs, and Briggs versus Elliott was the South Carolina case that combined with the Delaware case, the Virginia case, and the Topeka, Kansas case that we all know collectively as Brown versus the Board of Education. So when Thurgood Marshall comes in South Carolina and spots Will Robinson and Oliver Hill and all the cats that were trained at Howard Law School, it's the teachers who have found the plaintiffs to go. And in South Carolina, it was Briggs versus Elliott, and man, we gotta talk about that, because the question I always have is, where is everybody's records? Because when they merged and integrated, because no longer Palmetto, this book talks about the merger of the South Carolina Educators Association and the Palmetto Education Association, because they had a nationwide group called ATA. That was the black version. And then the NEA is the white version. When they merge, a lot of those records get thrown away. Integrated schools, the white people come in and throw away all the records. And the reason Vanessa Walker was able to write this book is because support the ASCAC building fund.
Horace Tate and the GT and EA bought a big building in Atlanta that they own. And as he got to be an elder just before he transitioned, she was interviewing him, and he kept asking her, have you been to the building? Have you been to the building? And she said, I'm gonna go to the building. Then she passed away, and he passed away, and her daughter, who's a state senator, took his seat in the Georgia legislature. You know how black folks are. They want a son, and the daughter come out, and they name the son. They name just like the son. His Horace Tate's daughter is named Horacina Tate. Southern Negro, very African. Anyway, so Senator Horacina Tate said, did you go down there? Daddy told you to go to the building. They own the building. So when she went in the building, she realized there's two buildings. There's one on the front of the street, and there's this big building behind. She said, no, you don't mean the front building, you mean the back building. Then she went upstairs, and he had all the records of the GT and EA. And that's why she's able to say, what I did for Georgia should have been done for every segregated state, because every state had a file like this. And these were the intellectuals, the teachers were the intellectuals. These were the women and men who did this work, primarily women. So we realized it's a bluff. The reason you study is so that when you engage in intellectual warfare, you come out victorious, because you don't have a leg to stand on. It's exactly how cats who've never opened a book feel about it. But once you study the stuff, you can keep that same fire, give them all that smoke, but do it in a way so that people sit there and say, I knew that was some bullshit, but thank you. And then the most important part of the process, what should I read? Who should I join? What should I study? And then you turn them over to that.
Greg?
Yes.
You want to throw in the second Reconstruction for a minute?
Oh, of course. Well, you mean, go ahead.
The Arkley did that.
What's that?
You remember the Arkley?
Oh, of course, on the second Reconstruction, no question. Well, you know, the beautiful thing about him is that usually ends up in the books.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Lerone Bennett was the senior editor for Ebony magazine. Mr. Johnson let him pretty much do what he wanted to do, so he would write these long-form articles in Ebony and then combine them into books. That's where Before the Mayflower comes from, that's where Black Power. So that article ends up in this book, The Second Reconstruction. In fact, he and I had a long conversation about that. What I told him was, I said, you know, this is cool. Have you gone back and read Ebony magazine? I said, you look at Ebony magazine in any 3-year stretch during the 1960s and 70s, and you will find articles that say everything in here, not contemporized, but and beyond. He's like, oh, that's very interesting. You send me some more about that. Here you go. Because I know this your friend. I know she's well-meaning. She's very bright. And she's out there giving talks. She's probably been on this. Has she been here yet? She's I'm sorry, University of South Carolina. Bigger budget. But the point is that while you are talking about things you discovered, we know all you're saying is, and here's something else I didn't know. Not, here's something else nobody knew. When they say nobody, they mean him. Yeah. Did you know that Reconstruction is something, this is unknown? No, just say you didn't know it. Because Lerone Bennett spent his whole life writing about it, and he like you, was a journalist. He's not a historian. Can't be people's name. Oh, I put Byron Allen down there because that's a whole other kind of, let's get rid of that. All right, now, anybody know who that is?
James Reese Europe.
Yes, the great James Reese Europe. This brother right here, and the Harlem Hellfighters fame, the Harlem 369. Hit it one time, Cat. This is a very important book. One more time. Repair. This is one I was talking about. Catherine Franke is a very interesting scholar. She's at Columbia, well, she teaches at Columbia. She runs the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York. I had a real fight with my colleagues in freshman seminar at Howard this year, because you heard Brother Gunn say, we got about 1,200 freshmen reading this book this year. This is the first book we ever picked that wasn't by a white person, and wasn't by a black person. It wasn't by a person of African descent, wasn't by an African. Heard Cat talk about Becoming. We had him read Daniel Black. We had him read Barracoon, as your students did. We read Zora Hurston, Barracoon. We read every book we read. We read Ta-Nehisi's book. Ta-Nehisi asked us to read Between the World and Me just before it came out. So we had scheduled it, got everything there, then he blew up and was like, how'd you get him to come to Howard first? Well, he went to Howard, but he asked us to do it, so we'll do it. But that year, we also read another book by a poet named, oh my goodness, what am I thinking? Citizen, Claudia Rankine. Very interesting, but then Claudia Rankine read the MacArthur Grant. Again, support the ASCAC Building Fund. Why? Because when you find black people that white people have decided can help them, they support those black people. They give them money for grants. In this case, she wins the MacArthur Genius Grant the year after Ta-Nehisi does. And they said, nobody knows how people get the Genius Grants. It ain't no secret. You give one Negro the Genius Grant, then they go around and tell you which next Negro to give it to. It's not that hard. But anyway, that money frees you up to do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. If they ever gave me MacArthur, we'd have our building that day. Thank you, $500,000 here about when we were go do Get the committee, y'all do what y'all want. But that's what happens when they press accelerator on Negroes they think can help them save their project. But this project can't be saved. The time to save this project, as Jerome Bennett correctly notes, was in 1869, 1868, 1867, 1870, 1871, 1870 when they put together what they call now, well they did the Ku Klux Klan Act right after that, but they established something in the federal government that everybody here has heard of in 1870. Ulysses Grant was president, and they started something called, what do they call it, the Department of Justice. And Grant, who was an old general, of course, tells these white prosecutors, this is why I asked about the prosecutor question. He said, the only way we're gonna get this thing controlled in the South, y'all gotta put some of these Klansmen in jail. So the first prosecutors in the Department of Justice were tasked with the job of coming to the South and putting Klansmen on trial with the Civil Rights Act of 1866, 13th Amendment, combative servitude, all this stuff, and that's why those brothers testified in open federal court in the 19th century, because the federal government understood if we don't get the South in line, they're gonna go to fight again, they're gonna tear this country apart. And once they thought they had them together, that same group was like, you buy land. How did they buy any land during this period? And that's the land, if you've got people in this room who got people who got land in South Carolina, 9 times out of 10, that's the land they figured out a way to acquire, even in the face of this complete and utter sellout. And they still did it. Then she goes, the next chapter, very quickly, I do this in 30 seconds. Jefferson Davis had an older brother, Ben. Ben owned one of the biggest plantations in Mississippi called Davis's Bend. The Union Army went to these black people and told them, look, y'all free, but y'all work the land. Not only these Negroes managed Davis Bend plantation, they turned a profit and gave the first profits to a little organization they had just started that had no federal budget. That organization was the Freedmen's Bureau. Black people met the budget of the Freedmen's Bureau on plantations, and after the Civil War, they sold them out on that land too. Jefferson Davis's brother, Benjamin. Let's keep going. Because her thing is, the only way you're gonna fix this is when my people die and I get the property and I get the land, you gotta put a tax on every transfer of wealth for every white person in the country above a certain income. And you take that money and you put that in a collective land trust, you put that in all the HBCUs, you put this, because the only way this gonna be fixed, it cannot be fixed, as you said brilliantly, brother. This can't be fixed with education. This can't be fixed with entrepreneurship. This can't be fixed with, that's what Sandy and them talking about. They can't be fixed, you know, my man at Ohio State, Hamilton. You can't fix this with that. The only way this is gonna be fixed, somebody gotta take an L. Because they took the ultimate L. The only way you're gonna, this gotta be based on land and a huge transfer of wealth. But Elizabeth Warren is like, well, everybody above 50 billion pays 2 cents. And you know the first one coming out to beat her up? Your friend. Barack Hussein Obama. Did you hear that? Because Barack Obama ain't no friend of nobody but the people that paid him and put him in the seat to be president. Again, you're gonna find people who can help them keep their project going. Well, I don't know. They gotta be Nancy Boca all the time. Well, bro, you sold out your father and Tom Mboya and Jomo Kenyatta and everybody else put you on your dad on a plane to come over here to learn and go back to Kenya, the nation builder. Don't get cute, bro. We'll embarrass you in front of everybody too. So this then becomes a question. This is our thing: Reconstruction, reparations, restoration. A directive from the first South. Before you hit it again, Kat, let me ask you: does anybody know where this phrase, the first South, came from? It's a nickname for a group of soldiers. One more time. Catherine Frankie's prepared. Then the Gospel Army. That was their other nickname. One more time, Kat. This is a fascinating book right here. Oh, did you know his brother Jahari Jabir? He wrote a book called Conjuring Freedom, just came out maybe last year. Music and Masculinity in the Civil War's Gospel Army. The first regiment of black soldiers in the Civil War was the 1st South Carolina. They call themselves the 1st South. These Negroes were something else. You had some Christians, you had some non-European spiritual traditions, what they might call some heathens. Opium men, conjurers, and this kind of thing. That's why he calls it Conjuring Freedom. He said every day they would do the drills, they would do their, military action, and then every night they would go out in the woods and do the ring shot. And they would sing all these songs and add all these lyrics. And he said that's the thing that made them the most effective group of soldiers, because they were Africans. He said, and it wasn't all Christians, because he said, let me hit again from Cat. So That's why I say the progeny is that first picture, the Harlem Hellfighters Band, 369. Those are the boys out of New York, Baltimore, different places. In fact, they trained here in South Carolina. I forget the name of the military base. Somebody here could probably remember. Remember when the 369, this is World War I. They came down to South Carolina to train. What's the big army training? Fort Jackson.
Yeah.
Yes. Columbia, South Carolina. That's where they were trained. That's where the base was. Yeah, and then they had to send them to France because they kept having incidents with these racist white boys who were from South Carolina and other places in the South. It was like, y'all Negroes, welcome to Jim Crow. Except these cats are not the slow-to-boil Southerners like me. You know, we know. My dad used to say, sometimes you gotta fight a war like you got one bullet. Do you really want to shoot your bullet at this? These are New Yorkers. What did you say? They like, oh, no, it's like, white. And so, there's an incident at the PX where the mascot of the 369, he's the mascot because he looked at, he was the drum major of the band. Jim Reese, one of the greatest musicians of all time, he puts a band together. The band, the 369, that's the band they say brought jazz into Europe. But the mascot of the band, the so-called mascot, the drum major was a little dude named Noble Sissel. Sissel Lake. You know, you be late, right? Baltimore, right? Noble Sissel goes into PX, the white boys harass him. They knock the hat off his head, he goes get his army head, they kick him in the behind. He goes back to the barracks and tell the rest of the brothers, they messing with me, and these dudes get their guns. They're gonna murder everything moving. At that point, the 369th gets its orders. Y'all gotta leave South Carolina, and that's when they go to Europe. Because you're gonna cross the line now. Y'all messing with, as they say in Philly, y'all messing with my young bulls. But this is really like the grandchildren in some ways, according to Jabir of the First South, the Gospel Army. They're Africans doing the race shop next to cat. So the thing is collective repair. That's that collective repair we were talking about earlier. We're talking about this thing now. How do we repair? Part of ASCAC's repair is we in a circle. We're gonna be in a circle of business meeting in the morning, talking about how we're gonna get this money for the business fund. Where's our next conference gonna be? We restore each other in this, and then once we've done our ring, we go out and do whatever else we need to do. Now we gotta expand the ring in this age of social media, but you know, we can do that. Let's go to the next one, Kat. Almost done. I think this is actually the last slide. The practice of restoration, the association, and I'm not talking about Woodstock. They call the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and History the association, and I think they should. I like calling ASCAC the association because it just sounds like a awesome criminals getting ready to go. The association. Like that Sidney Poitier movie. What's that movie he did after they called him Mr. Tibbs? In the heat of the night, they called him Mr. Tibbs in the third one. Oh man. Oh, y'all don't know what it's called. I think it's called the association.
Yeah.
It's called the association, isn't it? That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, I like it. He's like, people say, oh yeah, they call me. No, go to the third one. Right, that one and a couple others he made. You know, Poitier was doing some interesting things in the 70s. But one of the things is, this is our network. And it's our resource. And I'll end here with this. If you want to read about Septima Clark, her papers are at the College of Charleston. I know some of y'all been to the Avery Research Center. If you want to read about John Potts, who wrote the history of the Palmetto, it's at the Avery at the College of Charleston. Just like black people say, you know, we were here, so y'all owe us money. Look, you looking at the wrong, those aren't your parents. You don't stand on their shoulders. So when you're making a reparations claim to your open enemy, you're assuming that you have a relationship to them. And they have some kind of moral standard. The only way they're gonna give you reparations is if you take them. And the only way they're gonna know you're gonna take the reparations is that you will turn inward and do your ring shout and then come out and be like, now we're gonna negotiate. If you understand that, all you gotta do is look at Rich Paul and LeBron James. My man didn't go to college. That's his bull. LeBron hired all the finest lawyers and agents in the world, stuck Rich Paul in the room with him. Once he had learned everything they knew, he said, thank you very much, you're all fired, this is my man. And so then they got scared, so the NCAA is like, okay, we gotta make a rule now. If you wanna sign, you have to go to school, and then they're colluding with the NBA because they gotta stop this. Why? Because now LeBron's not just, Rich Paul don't just represent LeBron, Anthony Davis, everybody else coming over there. So we gotta stop this guy. Because he didn't come to us and say, oh, I want you to serve. No, he said, I got my boy. I'm the man. You want me to play? No problem. You're going to negotiate with him. And I got all your friends on the payroll, but then I fired them. Now you know what to do. So you're going to give me the, and now the NC2A, then you got Jamel Hill, got Black as Hell. Maybe they should go to HBCUs. And then what they do? They backed up off that NC2A Rich Paul rule right quick. Why? Because they're on the verge of collapse. So you don't get reparations from asking. You get from your position of strength. You know what I'm saying? And that's why ASCAC does what we do. In order to do it, in order to practice restoration, and to be a resource, our role, as Joe so beautifully said, one of our roles is to be a think tank, maybe the think tank. So when the social workers who are in so many ways, and I said this when y'all invited me to New Orleans that time, I said, look at that room, man, I said, y'all are the first line defenders. I would break like a cheap watch if I had to be a social worker for 2 days, brother. It's good and it's bad enough to be like Kat said, a teacher when these black students show up and ain't even seen nothing black till they 18, they come here saying, help me be black. Oh, and then you gotta manage that trauma, right? Because they ain't never been around black people who will say anything to each other. They sit there like, oh my God. Because that's increasingly what we find at these stores. It costs $20K to come here. About $20,000 a year. 30? Y'all jacked up to 30 already? What you sitting on, 2,000 students? 24 is good, right? Look, this campus right here, and this is one of the HBCUs in a better position, seems to me. Howard is bigger. Howard got a bigger budget. Howard also got bigger problems. It seems like this is the sweet spot, Kat. We might just come down here with you, then we all get fired. So we ain't gonna do that. They find out what you doing, here we come. Trying to shut them down. But the point is that we need a building. We need to follow our dear brother who's working now, advising on what we should do and doing leadership with our research commission. Brother Adisa, who knows these books better than anybody, as well as better than anybody. We got to figure out how to get our stuff digitized, put together. We need a brick and mortar building, because if we're going to be a resource and play our role as a think tank and a place where we workshop ideas, then we are going to have to restore ourselves. And part of that is going back to what worked before. Carr Woodson quit Howard after a year and a half, went to his house on 9th Street, lived on the 3rd floor, books in the bottom, in the basement, and those black women on the 1st floor, the 2nd floor, ran the association, and that's how he was able to pay our Rubius Ambush Taylor, who went to school at Fisk. I love that man since the time I read his book, The Negro in Tennessee. I loved him from the time I opened the book and it said, our Rubius Ambush Taylor. I named that child Ambush! You know what I'm saying? This dude is doing intellectual ambush. He's like, hold out with the wire. He's in the library. It's our Rubius. Yeah, murder all y'all. Let's read this message. I'm saying, wow, but Woodson was able to pay them because they were all in graduate school, and he gave them money because they went in the summertime selling books out of the trunk of their car, the black books to the black schools. So we want to restore. Let's go back and see what worked the last time. We got study guides, the series guide book. We can put everything in. We sell it. We get our money. Everybody pay their dues. Everybody come in, do their work, and then we take that little bit of money. We get our building. We get our stuff together, and then we consult. When New York Times come next time and ask me, I'll be like, yeah, no, we good. Read our publication. What about Foner? What about Foner? We deal with him in the publication. Just like Du Bois there was a mention. Just a mention, yeah, we put him where he's supposed to be. And better yet, watch our documentary. Why? Because we figured out how to use YouTube now. We don't need PBS. Because a kid can click on our link just as quick as she can on yours. And guess what? All the PBS documentaries changed it. And they bring Skip Gates in and say, look, man, you've been a good, loyal, faithful Negro, but we gotta let you go. Because if you remember, Henry Louis Gates finally, who's become black as hell in the last 15 years, is the same man that trashed John Henry Clark. And Clark and them was saying the same thing. He's trying to pretend like he's saying now, because these white people realize that we ain't never coming back to your plantation. And so now you gotta get a black person that looks a little bit blacker to get our attention. And guess what? That still ain't gonna work. Why? Because we out here in the woods doing our ring shot. We only fight for you when it looked like we can get something for us. I'm gonna stop there. Thank you.